Hi, I'm Marie. Welcome to Marie's Kitchen. I'm so glad you're back. Today we're making bourbon pecan pie with a homemade crust. This is one of my all-time favorite recipes. We make it every year for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and it is always a hit. If you've never made a homemade pie crust, don't worry. I'm going to walk you through each step and show you how actually really easy it is to make a homemade crust. For the filling, all you'll need is one bowl and a spatula to stir. It's my husband's favorite pie. It always gets rave reviews, so you're gonna wanna stick around for this one. Let's get started. Now, to make the crust, I am going to use a food processor. If you don't have a food processor, you can use a KitchenAid stand mixer. You can use beaters. You can even use your hands. So if you'd like to see those other versions of a pie crust, leave me a comment and let me know, and I'll make a new video with those. But for now, I'm going to show you how to make it in the food processor, and I will talk about how it is the same if you use other equipment. It's the same process. It's just a different way of cutting up the butter. So first up, we'll need 1 1/4 cup all-purpose flour, and to measure that, I'm just going to scoop that in with a spoon here. You don't want to pack flour in when you measure it. You just want to kind of sprinkle it in there and then use a knife to level that off. We'll just put the flour in here. We're using 1 1/4 cup. We'll just measure that out and level that off. For the sugar, we just need 1 tablespoon, and you can use anywhere from a teaspoon to a tablespoon. If you're making this for like a chicken pot pie, you want to go more in the teaspoon range. If you're making it for a sweet pie, I use a tablespoon. We'll just add that in. Next step is about 1/8 teaspoon of salt. You always want to have some salt in your dessert to balance out the flavors. Now I'll give this a quick pulse. And that's really just to mix up the dry ingredients. So if you're making this in a bowl or the KitchenAid stand mixer, just give it a spin or a stir. Okay, now I'm going to grab the butter. I do have the butter in the refrigerator right up until I use it because you want the butter to be cold. And the reason you want the butter to be cold is because you want to have little pieces of butter in your pie crust. So when you bake it, they melt, release steam, and that is what is going to create some flakes in the crust. So if you melted the butter, like if you were making a cookie dough and you had no pieces of butter, you would not have as flaky crust. It's still going to taste delicious, but in order to get those flakes that everyone talks about with a pie crust, you want to have whole pieces of butter. And to do that, the way to do that is to keep the butter cold throughout this process. So I'll show you the different ways that we do that. The first way we do that is keep it in the refrigerator until you're ready to use it. So let me grab it. Now here is our butter. It's unsalted, and we're just going to cut that into 8 tablespoons about. This doesn't have to be exact, just some pieces. You can even cut those in half if you like. And what we're going to do is just kind of sprinkle those into the food processor. Now what we'll do is pop the lid on and give this a few pulses just to break the butter up into some smaller pieces. If you're doing this with your hands, you just kind of mash it up into smaller pieces. Same for the KitchenAid stand mixer or beaters, kind of break it up into smaller pieces. So we're going to just pulse this a few times. And so what you can see is now, and you want to be careful because the blade's in there, but we're going to grab some out. You can see what I have here is some little tiny pieces of butter, and then I have some bigger ones. This is a little too big. These are just right. And you want to have sort of a mix of sizes. That's really what you're going for. The mix of sizes is great. So we'll give it another pulse because there were some bigger chunks. There we go. Okay, now it's time to add the water. So for the water, I do put ice in it to keep it nice and cold. One thing to note though is you don't want to get ice in the actual crust because then when it melts it creates these puddles that get really sticky. So no ice in there even if you have it in your water. You're going to scoop out about 5 tablespoons. 1, 2, 3, 4, and and 5. Let's go ahead and pulse this a few more times to mix that in. There we go. Looking good. So what we have now, it still looks very dry. However, if you reach in, careful of the blade, if you reach in and squeeze it together, it holds together like a crust. So this is how you know your crust is ready. So this is good to go. Our crust is done. Now what we're going to do is put the crust in some saran wrap, or Glad press and seal is what I like to use. I put the sticky side up. We're going to take our food processor bowl, take out the blade, and then we're going to take the food processor bowl and just flip it over right onto the press and seal, like that. Now we'll pull up the edges of the press and seal, bring that together, bring it into a disc, and we're going to twist it closed so it holds it all in there. And then I'm going to flatten this out into sort of a disc shape, and there is our pie crust. You can see these little pieces of butter there in the crust. See, there's some bigger ones in there. So there's different sizes, but you can see the butter in there. That's exactly what you're going for. This crust is going to be a nice, flaky, buttery crust. Now what we're going to do is pop this in the refrigerator while we make our filling. You need to do that for 2 reasons. Refrigerate the filling in order to let the gluten in the pie crust rest. If your gluten is very active, when you try to roll it out, it's going to pull back together. The second reason to refrigerate it is to get the butter back to cold again. It's gotten a little warm since we've been working with it, so we'll put it back in the fridge and let it harden up again so we have nice cold butter when it goes into the oven. Okay, time to make the filling, the easiest pie filling ever. Okay, we're going to start with 3 eggs. Next is 1 cup packed light brown sugar. Give it a little stir here. Next up, we'll add our 2 tablespoons flour. The flour helps it thicken up, so when you cut it, it's not running everywhere. Next is 1 cup light corn syrup, 1 tablespoon vanilla extract. Then we have our 2 tablespoons bourbon, and of course this is optional if you don't have it or can't use it. And of course the alcohol does cook off. Now we'll add our 2 tablespoons melted butter and give this a stir. And that is the filling. Can you believe it? Now we'll just add our pecans and this is done. For the pecans, I have pecan halves. You can use pecan pieces if it's more affordable. Okay, now we'll give that a stir. And that is done. Now it's time to set this aside and roll out our pie crust. Let's talk real quick about equipment that you'll need for this pie. I love a very simple Pyrex 9-inch pie plate. For the rolling pin, nothing fancy again. This is just probably an $8 to $10 rolling pin. Very simple. I like the ones with handles rather than just the long dowel. So, but really whatever you have is fine. But all I'm saying is you don't need to spend a lot on equipment for a pie plate or rolling pin. Let's set these aside, and when you are going to roll out a crust, you always do want to have some flour. We'll sprinkle some on our countertop here. So we've had the pie crust chilling. It feels really good. I'm going to go ahead and unwrap it now, and this looks great. So what I'm doing now is, well, first let me just big picture. With a pie crust, you don't want to knead it, you don't want to work it a lot, and for a couple of reasons. The first is you don't want to activate the gluten in the pie crust because, as I mentioned earlier, that's going to make the pie crust want to pull back together. The other reason we want to handle it as little as possible is because my hands are 98.6 degrees, and if I'm handling this a lot, I'm going to start melting the butter. Now we'll add some flour to our rolling pin so that doesn't stick. When you roll, generally you want to have a nice roll, and then we're going to turn the crust 1/4 of a turn. And the reason we want to do that is we don't want to, if we didn't turn it and we just kept rolling, you'd end up with a really long crust. So turning the crust helps it keep its shape in a nice round circle. It also prevents the crust from sticking. If you're turning it every time you roll it, then you're making sure it's not sticking, because if your pie sticks to the counter or whatever you're rolling on, that can be a mess and you often have to just ball it up and start over. So do turn it after each roll. Here we go, we'll give it a roll, give it a turn, give it a roll, give it a turn. Now, depending on what size pie plate, if you don't have a 9-inch, or even if you do, you're going to need to measure and see when you know to stop rolling. So what I like to do is take my pie plate, flip it upside down, and set it right on top of the dough. You want to have about 2 inches coming off around the side, and that'll give you enough dough to come up the lip and create a nice thick edge. So this looks just right for my 9-inch pie plate. So now if you can see here up close, you can see there's some nice big pieces of butter around. There's some various sizes, and you just see all this butter in there, and that is a sign of a great crust. So this is looking really good, and I just wanted you to have a close-up so you know what to expect. Now we're going to move it over into our pie plate, and the way I do that is just fold it over, set the pie plate here, then move this right into the pie plate and unfold it. So now we're going to create our decorative edge, and to do that I'm just going to take this little edge here hanging over what I call the lip of the pie plate, and we're going to tuck that under. So it'll make a nice straight thick edge all the way around. Now if you have kind of a lot of pie crust hanging off, you can pinch that off a little bit, so you don't have quite as much, because you don't want a big hump, you know, a big lump of crust there. You wanted a nice even edge, so you can break some off there. And if you need it in another spot where maybe it's a little thin, you can use it. Okay, we've got our oven preheating to 425 degrees. So we'll just keep tucking this under all the way around. And it doesn't need to be anywhere near perfect. It doesn't matter if it's not exactly even. Nothing in life is perfect, and that should not be your goal in cooking or in life. Now we'll make the fluted edge, and to do that what I'm going to do is use 2 fingers and my knuckle, and just press the pie crust between 2 fingers and my knuckle, and we'll go around and it'll turn it into a fluted edge. So 2 fingers and my knuckle there to make that. And if it gets sticky, just put a little flour there on your knuckle and that should help. So all the way around. And there is a homemade pie crust with a fluted edge. Now you can make this ahead. This is such a great thing when the holidays are coming up. Make this ahead. You can make it up to a month ahead. Wrap it real well in saran wrap, pop it in the freezer, and leave it in there until you're ready to use it. A frozen crust is actually better because it holds its shape better when it gets in the oven. So I always freeze my crusts. Even this one, I'm going to freeze it for about 15 minutes before we add the filling and bake it. And that is just to, again, reharden the butter, keep everything in its place, make it nice and cold, almost frozen, so when it does go in the oven, it holds its shape better under that hot heat. Okay, the crust has been freezing for about 15 minutes, so it's nice and cold. Now we'll add our filling and pop this in the oven. Just give this a quick stir and pour that right in. Spread it out a little bit. We're going to bake it at 425 for 15 minutes. Then we'll reduce the heat to 350 degrees and cook it for 45 to 50 minutes more. And I almost forgot, I do always like to cook my pies on a cookie sheet. That's usually in case it does overflow. Pecan pies won't, but just in case if it does overflow, you don't have a huge mess in your oven to clean up. Okay, the pie is done. We're actually giving this one to a friend as a gift, so we're not going to cut into it. We're just going to kind of sit here and admire it and try not to sneak a taste. If you like this video, be sure to give us a thumbs up. We so appreciate your likes. Also, hit that subscribe button and the bell button, and that will give you notifications of every new video. We have one coming out each week, all with easy recipes just like this, and I don't want you to miss any of them. For this recipe and more, check out my website, 𝗜𝗡𝗚𝗥𝗘𝗗𝗓𝗏. There you can go and print out this recipe as well as all my recipes. And if you like, put them in a notebook and make your very own Marie's Kitchen cookbook for free. My goal is to give you some really easy recipes that turn out great every time so you can build some confidence in the kitchen and feel really inspired to share good food with people that you love. From my kitchen to yours, thank you.